Hello and welcome to another episode of Cyberspeak with InfoSec Institute. Today's guest is Pete Zaborszky, founder of bestvpn.com. Pete's specialty is virtual private networks, and as VPNs become more and more commonplace, I thought it might be a good opportunity to talk about some VPN safety best practices, some of the issues currently swirling around VPN use and privacy, and some of the ethical considerations around VPN use. Pete Zaborszky has been invested in privacy since before Edward Snowden's revelations. Founded in 2013, his website, bestvpn.com, has helped over 30 million visitors gain information on how to protect their privacy in the digital age. Together with a team of experts, bestvpn.com is dedicated to fighting for people's privacy and freedom to use the internet when, where, and how they wish. Pete, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
So tell me first about your security journey. Where did you first get interested in computers and tech, and what was the path from there to founding bestvpn.com?
Oh yeah, that's right to the beginning. So it started when I was about 15 or 16. That's when I learned programming myself, and I made some online games, and then ended up doing a degree in computing.
Mm-hmm.
And I always sort of wanted to start my own business. So I tried quite a few ventures, but then in 2013, that's when I started bestvpn.com, and what was interesting about it is that it's something that very much aligned with my personality. I think some of the other businesses I tried weren't really what I was truly interested in, but being kind of quite a libertarian, quite concerned about let's say the small person versus large governments or large corporations, it was something that aligned really well to my personality, and that's maybe why it became so successful. So we started it right before Edward Snowden came out with his revelations, and it kind of took off after that. So that's a short history of bestvpn.com.
So to get our listeners up to speed, those who haven't visited your site, what does bestvpn.com cover on the site? What is your organization's purpose, and how long have you been writing about VPN use?
So obviously it's called bestvpn.com, so we're comparing VPN services, but right from the beginning I thought this to really make this site successful, it needs to be about more than just VPNs and more about the privacy issue and cybersecurity generally. So we've sorry about that.
Okay.
So we always focused on writing guides about privacy, guides about cybersecurity. I think one of the most famous ones is like the Ultimate Privacy Guide, which is over 10,000 words all about privacy. And I think that joined into the VPN topic really, really nicely. And a lot of people find us when they're reading these guides, not necessarily when they're looking for VPNs. But then the nice thing about it is then the business came along, the business side of things, that we could go along and compare VPNs, build a business on the back of that.
So it's not just a consumer guide for people who are buying VPNs now. I think it's worth noting, because the name of it might suggest that if you're not buying a VPN right now, there's nothing to see on the site. But if you're interested in sort of protecting your privacy and your sort of best practices in that regard, it's also a good resource. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So how has the use of virtual private networks changed since they were first introduced? A few years ago, it seemed like only elite computer users had VPNs, but they're pretty common now. So what do you think brought about such a quick change?
So it's definitely just the issue of what big companies and what governments are doing with your data, and it's become very, very mainstream, and a lot of people are thinking about it in the general public, not just in the IT sector or the cybersecurity sector. And I think also because of that, when I started, it was a slightly gray area, whereas now it's very, very much a mainstream product, and there's a lot of uses for the general public, because we are, let's say, very, very much at risk of how the people using our data in weird and in ways we don't necessarily want them to use it. And a VPN is an important part of like a portfolio of software that you need to protect your privacy.
Yeah. How do you think that sort of perception changed? I mean, I guess just the sort of situation we're in now, in the sense that people are realizing what their data is being used for. Because like you say, VPNs seemed very sort of, underground a couple of years ago. And now, around the water cooler, everyone's talking about what they're using their VPNs for and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think maybe it's partly to do with the fact that I'd say Edward Snowden definitely had a big impact, but also if you look at what Google and Facebook have done since kind of 2013, and how I think back in 2013 they were like really good corporations that everyone was in love with. They offered a great service, and if you think about it now, that's changed a lot, and people aren't that happy with what they're doing with your personal data. I think that as well, and also just as the internet's evolved, moved along, people are a lot more aware that, let's say, if I'm using Wi-Fi in a cafe, then that might actually be dangerous because someone could intercept your communications. So I think it's just generally people have heard stories and they've gotten a lot more informed about what they need to be careful of.
So I want to talk about this perception of VPNs and sort of introduce it with a little personal story. So, when your name was suggested for the podcast, I went to look up bestvpn.com at work, and I got an error saying that, the IP was blocked for reason of, quote, proxy avoidance. So when I tried again to look at you on my phone using my data plan, the site came right up, of course. So this suggests that our web filtering service at work blocked your site because it didn't want us to know about VPNs and other options to get on alternate networks. So do you think this is a common thing in your experience? Is the very concept of VPNs considered taboo by internet service providers?
I think we've seen this happen more and more. I think for someone in the US or Europe, it's something that's maybe a bit shocking when something like that happens. I think if you're in Asia, it's actually something that it happens every day. I'm in China, Indonesia, Thailand. They have sites blocked all the time. But it's interesting how our governments or ISPs are becoming a lot more. They're starting to censor things a lot more, and it's a very, very worrying trend. I think it's not really what the internet was founded on. It was supposed to be free-flowing information, but now apparently an ISP can decide what you should be looking at and what you shouldn't be. And I think that's, especially if you're from the US, UK, that sort of thing, it's very, very strange to be faced with censorship. It's not something we've seen.
No, something. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you think there's this worry that I think it's a real worry that ISPs are beginning to believe that the use of unauthorized VPN servers, that we're getting this sort of friendly fire by removing all references to VPNs at all. So you're not just getting illegal uses taken away, but also educational materials and so forth.
Yes, and it's almost it could even impact users in a really, really bad way, because let's say you are using public Wi-Fi. It is actually a lot safer using that with a VPN, but you're kind of jeopardizing that as an ISP by not letting people use a VPN. So you're almost putting users at risk. Yeah. So
at this point in the game, what are some of the main things you found that VPNs are being used for, especially in, like you say, in the US and in the UK? So, the common conversational use you hear is people are, streaming TV shows from countries that, that they're not in or whatever, but there's got to be a lot more uses. What are some of the main uses people are using for VPNs in your experience?
So I think that let's give the devil his due. That's something that's still happening quite a lot. But what we've progressively seen, the whole privacy issue, we run some questionnaires on the website asking people what they want a VPN for, and we've seen privacy becoming more and more of an issue. So I think more and more people are just using a VPN for that. Also, I think as people travel more and more, they also want a VPN, not just for security, but also, let's say you do go to Thailand or you do go to somewhere in Asia where there's site censored, you realize that's happening and you start using a VPN. So I think those are probably the two biggest uses.
So you use the term already, but the main selling point of VPNs is privacy and the promise of being able to browse or do projects online without the big brother like monitoring of every click. But we need to be clear in our terminology here. Is there a distinction between privacy and anonymity? Is there sort of like a limit to how anonymous you can be on the internet even with a VPN?
Yeah, and this is something we talk about a lot in these guides about privacy, because if you're looking for absolute anonymity, then VPNs aren't for you. And another thing we always say is if you're doing criminal activities, then don't use a VPN, because For one thing, you shouldn't be using a VPN for that or doing illegal things, but it won't actually help that much.
Yeah.
If the FBI, NSA, whatever want to come after you, a VPN is not going to help. So people need to be very, very aware of that. I think that's why, the things I was talking about before, that's what kind of VPNs are good for. If you want more and more, let's say, anonymity versus privacy, you need to read up about the topic a lot more. And there's like a nice metaphor of like a risk. You have like a risk ladder, maybe let's say that, where depending on how high you want to be on that ladder and how anonymous you want to be, you need to look into more and more tools to do that. If you're a whistleblower or a journalist at doing high risk things, then it's throwaway laptop, it's only using Wi-Fi's in cafes, getting rid of the laptop afterwards, that sort of thing. So a VPN won't help you in those cases.
Yeah, to sort of jump on that, there was an article, a news story back in April on naked security. There was an employee at Pen Air who, upon her retirement from the company, used a VPN to set up puppet accounts, at the airline, and was wiping out assignment maps and also creating top-level privileges for herself. And she was able to be caught because there was a trail of VPN logs that delineated all of her activities. So I think this sort of ties into what you said, that there's VPNs don't offer ultimate privacy, but it seems like a lot of VPN providers do sort of suggest or skirt around the issue that we don't keep logs or so forth. So how does your site sort of check to make sure that what VPNs are say they're providing, are they're actually providing, or do they all keep logs?
I think that's very unlikely, although it's very, very difficult to verify.
Yeah.
Really good is that more and more big name VPNs are coming out with public audits of their services.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, you have to know that it's almost impossible to really know if someone's keeping logs or not. But I'd say if a certain VPN that we know has got millions of customers and there hasn't been an issue where logs have someone's gotten arrested or whatever based on logs. If it's a big VPN company, it's very unlikely that they are keeping logs, because it would get into the public domain that something has happened with logs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the ways. And then public audits, we do our own audits as well.
Okay.
So it's hard to know exactly, but there's always indications of whether logs might be an issue or not.
So philosophically speaking, what are your thoughts on a case like that where someone was arrested, but it was done under the auspices of keeping logs, which they may or may not claim to be able to do? Is that do you think that was worth it in that case, or does that sort of open up another can of worms about what all this is actually for?
Well, I think there's been a couple of cases over the years where this has happened, and the one of the providers who it's happened to has had a bad reputation even before that. So I'd say, do your research before you buy a VPN. And then there's another issue around it, is whether let's say you can keep logs in two ways. You can keep all the logs forever, or you can say, if the FBI comes to us and they do a request, then maybe we start logging some traffic. And that's happened in some cases as well.
Okay.
That's let's say we can maybe let the VPN slightly off the hook in that case.
Of course. Yeah.
Although it's still quite bad.
Yeah.
But I'd say if what you're doing with a VPN is really you're kind of outsourcing trust into the VPN, and you're saying, I'm willing to trust the VPN more than I'm willing to trust, let's say, my ISP.
Right.
So you kind of weigh the odds there about, if I get a VPN, they've got millions of customers, millions of those customers trust them to not give up their data. So they've got a very big vested interest in not doing that. So they're probably going to be better than ISPs who, last year we had the legislation go through where ISPs can now sell your browsing data. So you need to kind of weigh up those things to make a choice about who you want to trust more.
Well, that jumps nicely into my next question. How do you recommend your readers go about shopping for a trustworthy VPN service provider? What are some red flags to consider when making your decision?
So I think go and read reviews about the VPNs and read them on multiple sites. I always say you don't have to just read bestvpn.com, although
Okay,
we try to do our best.
sure.
But I think
Start there.
if you're seeing consistently good reviews about a certain VPN, then that means something. And also at this point, I think smaller VPNs are having more and more of a difficult time. So the big VPNs, since they've got so many customers, they're obviously doing something right. So I think this happens with most markets anyway, but I think the bigger players are starting to get stronger and stronger as we go on. So I think big brand names are quite reliable at this point, just because it's become such a big market. And then usually the comparison sites will have already reviewed any. Sometimes there's been academic papers out about which VPNs do like ad tracking on. This is especially an issue on mobile, about which VPNs actually leak some data because of ad tracking. So we've gone through those academic papers, we've distilled them, we've written articles about them. So I think if you're looking through these comparison sites, they're going to have some pretty good information. They're going to have historic information built up about what's happened in the industry. So I think that's a good place to start.
So what can you expect to pay for a VPN? I mean, obviously it varies depending on what you need, but what's like an average cost if someone's looking to buy one for the first time?
So I think if you're paying month by month, then expect between $5 to $15 a month.
Okay.
If you're willing to pay up front, then you can get as low as about $3 a month to maybe even $2. But that's getting into cheap territory, so you never know how long that's sustainable.
Right. So for people who still think, as we said before, of VPNs as just a way to stream content from other countries and stuff, what are some of the more interesting uses of VPNs that you've been seeing that people might not have thought of?
So this is something we've tried to test, but we haven't really got definitive data. But
Okay.
There do seem to be instances where certain websites we don't know how they do it, but based on your profile that they see, they show different prices for the same product. So it's been rumored that airlines have done this. So you'll see different prices depending on where you are for a certain airline ticket. So people have been using VPNs to get cheaper prices on airlines, possibly hotels as well. As I say, there's no definitive data on that, but it could happen.
Is it like they see your browsing data and see that you're already buying high end stuff, and so they feel like they can charge you more for a plane ticket or something?
Yeah, I think that could well happen. Yeah, if they've got a profile of you that you're a rich person, then yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we mentioned it very briefly before, but I read somewhere that only 23% of countries have a free and open internet. So with so many countries' access to information being restricted daily by their governments or companies, what roles can VPNs play in situations of helping to view, restricted content, criticize dictators, organize civil actions? Is that something, you've seen or have been involved in at all?
It's a major part. I think maybe the biggest victory for VPNs was when the Arab Springs were happening.
Yep.
There was a big VPN company who are probably the biggest brand name right now, and almost everyone was using them because obviously all the Arab governments were blocking access to social media. But with a VPN you could still access them. So they really spread very, very quickly in those times, and I think that was a real victory to help people to rebel against their governments. And yeah, that sort of thing is probably happening more and more often. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that people reading about those things over here, probably it helped to mainstream the idea of VPNs, even in countries where you're not getting restricted content all day.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we're not going in a direction where there's more and more free. More and more countries have got free internet. We're going in the other direction.
Sure, for sure. Say you've got your VPN here. What are some security measures that new VPN users should implement when using them? What are some common mistakes that could be exploited by hackers?
it's not. I think out of the box, they're going to work fairly well.
Okay.
You should probably make sure that the VPN you choose has got a kill switch and it's turned on. So what a kill switch does is if anything happens with your internet connection and suddenly your VPN connection drops, then it blocks all internet traffic, so you don't leak anything, which is a really useful feature. And what I always say is, along with a VPN, you should probably be using an ad blocker as well, or just one of those tracking blockers.
Okay.
Because that's one way where a VPN can't really help you to be leaking information to advertisers. So using an ad blocking software or tracking blocking software plus a VPN, that's covering a lot of your bases. So those two in combination are really good.
Okay, so between those two, you're more covered than not. It sounds like there's not. Okay,
definitely.
Okay. So as we wrap things up, where do you see VPNs going in the future? Do you see, more regulation, other, applications that aren't currently being utilized, and what is Best VPN planning on doing to sort of address these future applications and expansions?
So I think we're just coming up to the market becoming mainstream. So you're probably starting to see VPN adverts in some fairly mainstream places now, and I think that's going to continue over the next few years. So the VPNs are going to become like common knowledge that this is a product that exists, this is what it does. So I still think there's a lot of people who still haven't heard of a VPN or don't know what it does, who will start to know what it is. So there's a lot of growth left there. And in terms of use, I think, as I said multiple times, I think the internet isn't going in a direction where it's becoming more free. So let's say, for me personally, let's say that's unfortunately, business-wise, it might be good, but I don't think it's a good thing. But it's likely VPNs are going to be needed more and more.
That just sort of, I was going to wrap there, but it made me think of another thing. When you think of things like, say, marijuana legislation, you had these, sort of small, growers and small people. And then as it becomes more and more mainstream, you start getting sort of like corporate people, the tobacco industry might, want to come in. Is there a chance that in the case of VPNs, you have these sort of small companies who are invested in the idea of privacy? Is there a chance that like the concept of VPN could be sort of co-opted by larger like tech companies that sort of want to get in on the action, but maybe don't have the same, I don't know, mission statement?
I think you need to look at, so it's a weird one because the entire market is built on trust and privacy. So so there have been attempts by big, let's say big Silicon Valley corporations of launching VPNs. Actually, Facebook has got their own VPN. But they don't really take off because there's a disconnect between those businesses and privacy. So
okay, so people are still seeing through it more or less.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be very difficult for a business who isn't that trustworthy to be able to build a VPN properly. So you need to build that trust with customers, and they always say trust is really, really hard to build, and you can break it in a moment.
Right.
So that's what you need to keep in mind. If it hasn't been broken for a long time, then these VPN companies are doing something right.
That's great. Pete Zaborszky, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, and thank you all for listening and watching. If you enjoyed today's video, you can find many more of them on our YouTube page. Just go to YouTube and type in InfoSec Institute to type in to check out our collection of tutorials, interviews, and past webinars. If you'd rather have us in your ears during your workday, all of our videos are also available as audio podcasts. Please visit infosecinstitute.com/cyberspeak for the full list of episodes. Podcast listeners can also go to infosecinstitute.com/podcast to see our current special promotions. And finally, if you'd like to try our free Security IQ package, which includes phishing simulators you can use to fake fish and then educate your colleagues and friends in the ways of security awareness, visit infosecinstitute.com/security-IQ. Thanks once again to Pete Zaborszky, and thank you all for watching and listening. We'll talk to you next week.